Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. Want to travel like a savvy jet setter? No, that doesn't mean a monogrammed passport case. It means making smart decisions every step of your trip, which means knowing your options. Smart Travel unpacks the facts, like which booking sites actually save money, how to fly first class using points, and if that fancy travel card is a smart investment. All so you can save more on your next adventure. Stay tuned at the end of the episode to hear the Smart Travel trailer. And be sure to follow Smart Travel from NerdWallet so you can start traveling like a pro. Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. Want to travel like a savvy jet setter? No, that doesn't mean a monogrammed passport case. It means making smart decisions every step of your trip, which means knowing your options. Smart Travel unpacks the facts, like which booking sites actually save money, how to fly first class using points, and if that fancy travel card is a smart investment. All so you can save more on your next adventure. Stay tuned at the end of the episode to hear the Smart Travel trailer. And be sure to follow Smart Travel from NerdWallet so you can start traveling like a pro. Two weeks ago, Professor Jace Flatt got a letter from the National Institutes of Health about his federal grant money. It said, "This award no longer effectuates agency priorities."
Jace Flatt is one of many researchers who had a grant terminated by the NIH.
That's Katherine Wu, who writes about science for The Atlantic. She spoke to Flatt. He's an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, who studies aging and dementia in LGBTQ people.
And actually, in his case, it was multiple grants. The last I heard from him, it was 2 grants, and it is possible that by the time this airs, it will be 3 grants. He relies on those grants to hire staff to do research. Much of his research focuses on aging and how to ensure that populations are aging in a healthy way, and how those populations are dealing with memory loss and dementia. But having those grants terminated has effectively meant that he's had to halt studies, he's had to fire staff, and if this strain keeps going, he will not have a lab in a matter of potentially weeks or months.
Flatt also lost a grant from the Defense Department. He's one of many researchers who's had the federal funding for his work essentially vaporized.
I don't know how many people realize that grants that come from the federal government are, for many scientists, their primary source of salary, not just for, maybe themselves, but for all the people that they hire and train and to do all of their work.
You also spoke with a bunch of other people who get NIH grants. Sarah Nowak, a vaccine researcher at the University of Vermont. Tell me about her work and what happened to her.
Yeah, so she is one of many people who was hit by the round of grant terminations that focused on vaccine hesitancy and uptake for whatever reason. Those terms were flagged as problematic by the administration. The NIH informed her that her work on childhood hesitancy in Brazil would no longer be funded effective immediately.
I want to be really clear here. This is not normal.
If you were to receive a grant termination in what I'll call the before times, it was usually for a very, very, very specific reason, like something was going quite wrong with your work. And so generally you would be in contact with the agency, in this case, the NIH, and they'd say, hey, something's up. It seems like your project is not going well, or we're worried about the participants in the study. Like, what's up? Let's give you a chance to fix this.
There might be an appeal, a lot of conversations. None of that is happening now.
These researchers were given no warning whatsoever. They were basically told, we don't like the premise of your work anymore, and so we're not going to pay for it.
That means firing staff, maybe telling clinical trial patients you can't help them anymore, letting grad students know there is no place for them to study.
And there is basically no opportunity to appeal here. There's no opportunity to rectify the situation. Ideologically, you don't match up with us anymore, and so it's game over.
Today on the show, how the NIH grant terminations are an assault on science, medicine, and America's future. I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase of 16 weeks, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
This episode is brought to you by Bluehost. You might not be a tech genius, but you want the website for your business to crush it. Thankfully, Bluehost makes it easy. Customized, optimized, and monetized. Everything exactly how you want with AI. Your site can be up within minutes, and the search engine tools even help you get more site visitors. Whatever your passion project is, set it up with Bluehost. With their 30-day money-back guarantee, what have you got to lose? Head to Bluehost.com to start now.
I think a lot of Americans have some vague sense of NIH, but they might not understand what it does. What do you think is the simplest and best way to describe what the NIH exists to do?
Yeah, it's a great question because I totally agree with you. But the NIH, I would say, is the primary engine behind biomedical research in the world. It is the world's single largest public funder of biomedical research. And what that means is every year, they get a roughly $47 billion budget. Most of that goes to research outside the agency. And that money has fueled drug discovery, heart medication, vaccine research, outbreak containment and mitigation. All of these things that we consider crucial to public health and making sure that people in this country and around the world stay healthy, all that requires research, clinical trials. There's this amazing stat that something like 99% of the drugs that were FDA approved in the past decade or so had some sort of NIH funding behind them.
You talked a little bit about the grant cancellation process, but when a presidential administration changes hands, is it common at all for grants at NIH to come under review or possibly be canceled?
So when power changes hands, I'd say it's typical for priorities to shift, right? Because there is going to be generally a new director. That's a political appointee. There is generally going to be, a pet project that gets a little bit more attention than usual. But it's extremely unusual for the agency to reach backward in time and say, hey, this science that we thought was awesome and worthy of funding just a couple years ago, no longer worth our time. And you could imagine that if that were the norm, there would be these constant fits and starts. Like every 4 years, we're going to pull back funding we already gave out. We're going to give up on this stuff. We're going to tell these researchers, never mind, we were totally kidding when you said that was awesome work just a couple years ago. Nothing would ever get done. And so it makes sense that the system doesn't normally work this way. What's happening now is totally unprecedented, like ever in the NIH's entire history.
Is it even possible to know how many grants have been canceled since President Trump took office? Because this seems to be happening in waves, and it's sort of hard to get a running tally.
It's a great question. No one I've spoken to has a definitive count at this point, but I'm pretty sure we're talking in the hundreds now if we include all the terminations that have happened at Columbia University, where there was just a massive gutting. But there are lists that are sort of being cobbled together online by researchers, and there is technically an HHS website that is compiling some of the lists of terminated grants, but it's at least a week or two behind.
I want to talk a little bit about what's going on inside the agency. When you talk to staff who are still there, how do they describe the feeling at the NIH now?
It's brutal. I have heard a lot of tears. I have heard a lot of people saying that they never thought they would be complicit in the sort of harm that is being done right now to the American public. I mean, people have resigned over what has happened at the NIH. And I think I'm hearing now that this agency, which is primarily a funding agency, like their job is to get money out to research happening in the world, is now, in a way, spending more time terminating grants than it is awarding them. And it's like upside down NIH, It makes absolutely no sense.
With a change in administration comes a change in who runs the NIH. Right now, the administration's pick, Dr. J. Bhattacharya, is waiting for Senate confirmation. In the interim, the deputy director usually takes over. Many people expected Lawrence Tabak, a longtime deputy at the NIH, to fill the position temporarily, as he had in previous handovers.
But instead, Matt Memley was appointed, and he was a flu researcher within the agency who was running a lab doing his own research. Very, very, very confusing. It's kind of like, finding someone from an obscure little tech department at a giant Silicon Valley company to come and be CEO after absolutely no training or precedence whatsoever. He didn't have, the typical experience overseeing grants. He didn't have experience running a giant agency. It was very atypical. And the understanding that people have told me is that they think he just had ideological views that aligned with the current administration. People had talked about the fact that he had sort of publicly sparred with Tony Fauci over COVID vaccines during the pandemic. They had talked about the fact that, he had been complimented by Jay Bhattacharya, who is the current pick to lead NIH next. And there was also a diversity statement that came from him that was floating around the agency, showing that he had at one point called the term DEI offensive and demeaning.
You wrote one story that really stood out to me in late February. You talked about Lawrence Tabak, the principal deputy director, who at one point had said to colleagues, look, as civil servants, your job is not to figure out policy, but to implement them. That is your duty as long as you're not doing something illegal or immoral. And in your reporting, the staff were kind of walking around asking themselves, are we there yet? Are we at illegal or immoral? That was late February. How about now?
I think that sentiment has only gotten stronger. And I think people have more or less officially resigned because they think they have very much crossed over that line and they are done. Especially with all of these grant terminations, I think a lot of them are feeling like they're being asked to endanger the health of the American people. I mean, you think about the potential implications of these grant cancellations. You're potentially cutting people out of clinical trials that might have stood to improve their health, that maybe in some cases could have been their best chance at living a longer, healthier life. If you are, say, the grants management officer being forced to sign a termination like that, I mean, I'm hearing of people sobbing at their desks. I'm hearing of people being yelled at because they're reluctant to sign these terminations and yet being forced to do them anyway. I can't imagine working in an environment like that. I mean, people are saying it's toxic there. People are afraid to look each other in the eye in the hallways because they're not sure who they can talk to. They're not sure who they can confide in and say, I don't feel right about this, because they don't know who is talking to someone else who might get them fired.
When we come back, will a generation of scientists simply leave America?
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place. For changes big and small. Loud or quiet. Find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Workdays can be unpredictable, but your workwear shouldn't be. With the Cintas Apparel Plus program, you'll have freshly laundered garments for everyone on your team delivered every week. Cintas has workwear for just about any job imaginable, with high-performance fabrics and an uncompromising fit that stretches and moves with you. Don't leave looking and feeling good to chance. Visit Cintas.com.
Oh, I'm ready!
And get ready for the workday.
We talked about how a grant might normally, in the before times, be terminated. Do we have any insight into who is making these termination decisions now and how they're being made?
So the general understanding is that this is all happening under intense pressure from the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the NIH. So HHS has kind of pushed through several policy changes at NIH at this point, including a memo that some people may remember that would have capped basically overhead costs at universities, which has, come under severe legal challenge. But the basic idea here is that this is not an internally made, internally consistent decision. It's not like folks at NIH are getting together around a round table and debating the scientific merits of each of these projects and saying, hey, these are no longer in compliance with how business is done here normally. This is a push from the outside. And certainly the rationale being given for these terminations, everything about political ideology, new agency priorities, what the administration considers biological reality or not. And I'm using a lot of heavy air quotes around a lot of these phrases. That certainly indicates that it is far more political than it is scientific, which is not typical NIH day-to-day stuff.
I looked at one of the projects that you referenced in your story, and it's a canceled grant that was about how to get a potential future HIV vaccine into different communities. And when I look at the keywords on this listing, they include things like homophobia and institutional racism. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like somebody did a Control F for certain terms that fit under some broad ideological bucket and decided, this is how we're going to do it.
It does seem that way. One of the things that people are talking about is that even though there have been NIH officials tasked with putting together lists of projects that would sort of trip these kinds of censors and involve the concepts that the administration is not happy with, there's an additional search going on at maybe the HHS level, and grants are sort of being added to these lists, not always appropriately. Like if you, for instance, are looking for grants that relate to vaccine hesitancy and uptake, okay, arguably you are going to hit some studies that look at, for instance, childhood vaccine uptake in Brazil. But if you don't do that search very carefully, you might also hit some mathematical models that factor in vaccine uptake as a factor that is going to affect how quickly an infectious disease spreads through a given community, right?
Oh, wow.
But if you're not super careful, you might terminate some grants that make passing mention of these concepts but aren't entirely focused on them. And so there's going to be huge collateral damage, including to the targets that you originally went for.
I mean, I think of the word bias, for example, which comes up when you talk about implicit bias, but it's also a key term when you're just doing statistics.
That's right. And I heard some researchers so nervous about the sort of sloppiness with which these searches are being done that they're terrified to even use words like transition in their grant proposals at this point, because anyone who just quickly searches trans might accidentally hit their grant proposal.
Oh my God.
Same thing with biodiversity.
Because it has the word diversity in it?
That's right.
There's some reporting from Kaiser Health News that says some scientists were told by NIH officials to scrub mRNA references on grants. That is the technology that brought us COVID vaccines.
It is. And there's also a big concern right now that mRNA vaccines are going to be one of the next topics targeted in the next round of grant terminations. That would be a huge, huge, huge impact. That could be maybe hundreds of grants hit. I mean, this is huge technology, right? Like this made such an impact during the worst of COVID. And because mRNA technology is so fast, it could be huge for many other types of vaccines. So lots of people have been looking into this in the past few years. That would hit a lot of researchers, and I think it would really significantly hamper vaccine research in general, because I think there'd be this big cooling effect on anyone trying to debut a new vaccine technology using any sort of molecule.
There have been court orders saying that funding for grants needs to resume at the agency, but your reporting is showing that HHS officials have essentially told employees not to comply with the courts. What is happening inside the agency? What are employees doing?
I think people are doing their best to resume business as normal, but there are all these sort of logistical blocks being put into place. They've certainly been told to defy court orders. They've also come up against roadblocks like not being able to post notices about meetings that have to happen for grant proposals to be reviewed and for money to actually be awarded. So it's basically impossible to do their normal business at this point. Some of those things have since been reversed. It's all been very much in flux. But I think the balance has shifted in the past couple of months to be doing a lot less grant making than they would like and a lot more grant terminating than they could have ever imagined.
You know, when we have conversations about government funding, inevitably people say, well, why can't private money make up for this? Is there any kind of private funding that could fill this hole?
At scale, I'd say no. I mean, public government funding is a huge, huge, huge source of support for science in this country and others. And, for good reason. That is kind of by design, and it's been mostly by design since about the time of World War II. It's a really powerful system, and you can imagine that if we attempted to replace it, there would be a ton of issues. I mean, one, there is not enough private funding to fill that hole. But two, even if there was, there would be a lot of strings attached to that private funding. I mean, considering who would likely be the backers behind that private funding, individual companies would have their own interests. They might be wanting to make a specific profit or send a specific message. The types of research that would be funded would not necessarily just be about merit or general benefit to public health. It might be about marketability. It might be about what's most lucrative. And that, I think, could have a huge impact on the ability of this country to do basic research.
The way the funding stream works is that the money often goes to universities. We have seen Columbia lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Johns Hopkins, another university slated to lose its NIH money. These are some of the top medical research universities in the country. What does the loss of this funding mean for medical research?
I think it's huge. And I can think of that on multiple fronts. I mean, for one, just having any studies halted means a lost opportunity to gain new knowledge. It also means participants in some of those studies, if there were human participants, could be losing out on an opportunity to improve their health. Some of them might be in danger by having a trial very abruptly halted. The researchers running those trials may have their careers imperiled. And I think longer term, it means that, recruiting populations to studies like this in the future may be more difficult because now that trust has been violated. A lot of these people have been told, hey, come join this trial. We're going to interact with you, take care of you, maybe for years, maybe for decades in some of these cases. And then all of a sudden it's, Tuesday morning or whatever. And sorry, I have to call you and tell you that all that was for nothing. I'm so sorry. It's out of my hands. Nobody's going to want to come back to an opportunity like that. That's really difficult. And some of these studies involve vulnerable populations by definition. If those are the studies that are being gone after by the federal government, those are going to be some of the very studies that are going to be most difficult to restart or reimagine in the future.
So let's say that a whole lot of appeals courts say, nope, money's got to go back, study restarts, get back to what you were doing. Can these just be restarted?
Not really. I think there are a lot of things that have happened that have already left some permanent damage. For instance, if you decide we just can't take grad students next year, that's it for next year. Even if you take grad students the year after that, there's not going to be a grad cohort for 2025 to 2026. If you halt a study and tell participants, we have had to close this, and we are taking you out of the study, we're filling out the end of the line paperwork, you don't just restart that. For other studies, even if it's not that simple, if you don't have the funds to collect, say, data the month of March 2025, even if you have April 2025 and you're able to get something in May 2025, there's going to be a hole in your data set. Like, what if something big happened in that time frame and you no longer have the ability to say, we collected data every month for 20 years? Like, some studies truly do rely on that level of granularity. And it can, in some cases, truly mean that a decades-long study is kind of ruined.
Full disclosure, and this is a bit personal, but I am in a clinical trial supported by the National Cancer Institute that compares outcomes for different kinds of lung cancer treatment. And I'm fine. But before coming in to talk to you, I looked at my study's keywords to see if they fit in any of those, sort of control F terms. I did see a women's health section. As far as I know from the researchers running my trial, it's still ongoing. But I have to say, as a patient, and even as the most privileged kind of patient, it's really disorienting.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people share that sentiment right now. Researchers and study participants alike, they feel like the rug can be pulled out from under them at any second. And I can't imagine what it's like to be living like that, like to have to go to work or to your next appointment and wonder, is this going to be the last day that I'm able to contribute to this? Is this going to be the last day that we actually get to advance knowledge on this subject or maybe help someone and potentially save their life? That's a really difficult environment to be working in. That's a really difficult environment to be just surviving in. And I think the ultimate effect here is not only are we risking watching the general health of Americans decline over the next months, years, and decades, but scientists who have contributed immensely to biomedical knowledge in this country, they're going to leave. This is no longer going to be a place that people go to do research, to improve their health outcomes. America may decline in that respect, and that's a terrifying prospect as well.
There's something that really stuck with me in your reporting on this. You said that the Trump administration is trying to forcibly reshape American science to match its agenda. And that's so fascinating in a couple different ways, but fundamentally it doesn't align with the scientific process. It doesn't align with the way scientific inquiry tends to proceed. I wonder if you've thought about what science reshaped by that agenda might look like.
It's almost dystopian to imagine, right? Because you're exactly right. That's not how the best forms of scientific inquiry work. Science done well has minimal bias. People love this idea of objective data and just this idea that you do need to confront what is actually happening in the world. The data you gather may not always be exactly what you want to see, but you need to acknowledge what communities exist, what disparities exist, who is going to have a more difficult time accessing care, what is going to be more impacted by an environmental harm. All of these realities are just part and parcel of what it means to better understand the world as a whole. You start narrowing your lens and you're going to get a skewed portrait of the world. And I think what's even more concerning is the things that you ignore, they're not just going to stay ignored. They may worsen in the absence of attention. Infectious disease is especially prone to doing that. You ignore an outbreak and it is just going to get bigger. And I fear that that is what is going to happen on really broad scales as these lenses keep getting narrower and narrower.
Katherine Wu, thank you for your reporting and for talking with me about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Katherine J. Wu is a staff writer at The Atlantic. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell and Patrick Fort. Our show is edited by Rob Gunther. Slate is led by Hillary Fry. And TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you like what you heard, the best way to support us is to join Slate Plus. You get all your Slate podcasts ad-free, including this one, as well as access to The Discourse, our bonus series. Plus some other nice bonuses too, like you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. And if you are looking for more Slate podcasts to binge, go check out yesterday's What Next, which is all about how the Trump administration is radically changing the economy. All right, we'll be back on Sunday with an episode about Jeff Bezos 2.0 in Trump 2.0. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. I'm Megan Coyle.
And I'm Sally French. We're NerdWallet travel writers who help you turn dream trips into trips you can actually afford.
Because let's be honest, dream trips are usually synonymous with spending money.
But my dream is to not spend much money at all.
That's where Smart Travel comes in. We break down the best ways to stretch your travel dollars, whether it's scoring an upgrade without selling your soul, decoding loyalty programs so you can actually get something out of them, or figuring out if that ultra discount airline ticket is too good to be true.
It usually is.
And while we're at it, we'll show you how to turn canceled flights into lounge dinners and free hotel stays. Spoiler, it involves a lot of patience and a little bit of research. But don't worry, we've already done the heavy lifting. Because being financially savvy doesn't mean you have to skip out on an adventure. It just means you're the genius who paid less for it.
Each week, we bring you travel news, expert insights, and even some of our own travel wins and mishaps. All so you can travel more while paying less. And hey, you'll even have some fun along the way. So if you're ready to make your travel budget work harder and smarter, follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app.
First up, smarter travel. See you soon. Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. I'm Megan Coyle.
And I'm Sally French. We're NerdWallet travel writers who help you turn dream trips into trips you can actually afford.
Because let's be honest, dream trips are usually synonymous with spending money.
But my dream is to not spend much money at all.
That's where Smart Travel comes in. We break down the best ways to stretch your travel dollars, whether it's scoring an upgrade without selling your soul, decoding loyalty programs so you can actually get something out of them, or figuring out if that ultra discount airline ticket is too good to be true.
It usually is.
And while we're at it, we'll show you how to turn canceled flights into lounge dinners and free hotel stays. Spoiler, it involves a lot of patience and a little bit of research. But don't worry, we've already done the heavy lifting. Because being financially savvy doesn't mean you have to skip out on an adventure. It just means you're the genius who paid less for it.
Each week, we bring you travel news, expert insights, and even some of our own travel wins and mishaps. All so you can travel more while paying less. And hey, you'll even have some fun along the way. So if you're ready to make your travel budget work harder and smarter, follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app.
First up, smarter travel. See you soon.